Hello, this is Dr. Clarence R. Pearson Sr., and welcome to My View, a podcast where I offer my professional perspective on today's most pressing geopolitical and socioeconomic issues. Recently, my attention has been drawn to developments in the Middle East, where the United States Navy is strategically trying to clear Iranian mines in the Strait of Hormuz during a U.S. self declared ceasefire, and peace negotiations are underway. Is the negotiation honest? Or is this just another deceptive diplomacy? Here is my view on the matter. The Hormuz dilemma, tactical victory, strategic risk in America's new diplomacy. In the narrow waters of the Strait of Hormuz, where nearly a fifth of the world's oil supply passes each day, the United States is once again demonstrating the unmatched reach of its military power. As of April 2026, U.S. naval forces have begun the painstaking process of clearing Iranian sea mines, seeking to reopen a corridor that global commerce cannot afford to lose. At first glance, the operation appears both necessary and effective. Oil prices had surged by more than 30% following the disruption of shipping lanes, placing immense pressure on global markets and domestic economies alike. The deployment of the USS Frank E. Peterson Jr. and the USS Michael Murphy signals a clear intent: restore maritime flow, stabilize energy prices, and reassert control over one of the world's most critical choke points. Yet beneath this display of tactical competence lies a deeper and more troubling question. Is the ceasefire that has enabled these operations a genuine step toward peace, or merely a strategic pause, an opportunity to reset the battlefield under the cover of diplomacy? The answer matters far beyond the Gulf. Mine clearing is not a dramatic military maneuver. It is slow, methodical, and highly vulnerable work. Modern operations rely less on traditional sweeping vessels and more on advanced systems, underwater drones, helicopter borne detection tools, and modular countermeasure packages deployed from literal combat ships. These technologies allow for precision, but they also require a permissive environment. Without a ceasefire, such operations would be dangerously exposed to missile strikes, drone swarms, or fast attack naval units. In this sense, the current truce has created a rare window of opportunity. It has allowed the United States to begin dismantling one of Iran's most effective asymmetric tools: the ability to choke off a global energy supply through naval mining. Intelligence estimates suggest that thousands of mines were deployed across the narrow 21-mile wide passage, creating a silent threat that lingers long after the initial confrontation subsides. But even as Washington works to reopen the strait, a parallel strategic conversation is quietly gaining traction, one that could redefine the region's energy geography altogether. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has, in various strategic circles, advanced the idea that the world's dependence on the Strait of Hormuz represents a structural vulnerability. Instead of repeatedly defending this choke point, the argument goes global energy flows could be rerouted through an expanded network of pipelines leading westward, ultimately terminating at Israeli controlled ports along the Mediterranean. Such a shift would be transformative. It would effectively bypass the strait, stripping Iran of its most potent economic leverage while simultaneously elevating Israel into a central transit hub for Gulf energy exports. The geopolitical implications are profound. Gulf states would remain the owners of the oil, but Israel would become the gatekeeper of its delivery to European and potentially global markets. For Israel, this is more than infrastructure, it is strategy. It promises not only security from maritime disruption, but also a long term rebalancing of regional power. For Gulf producers, it presents both opportunity and risk: diversification of export routes on one hand, and a new dependency on Israeli controlled logistics on the other. And for Iran, it is an existential challenge. Tehran's strategic doctrine has long relied on the Strait of Hormuz as a deterrent equalizer, a tool that allows it to offset conventional military disadvantages by threatening global economic disruption. The mere possibility of closure has historically served as a powerful bargaining chip, influencing negotiations far beyond the Gulf. The current mine clearing operation, therefore, is unlikely to be interpreted by Iran as a neutral act of economic stabilization. Rather, it will be read as part of a broader effort to neutralize its asymmetric advantage, not just temporarily, but permanently. From Tehran's perspective, two developments are converging in troubling ways. First, the physical removal of mines reduces its immediate capacity to disrupt shipping. Second, the growing discussion of alternative pipeline routes suggests a future in which the strait itself becomes strategically irrelevant. Faced with this dual threat, Iran's response is likely to be calibrated but consequential. In the short term, Tehran may avoid direct confrontation, particularly while diplomatic channels, such as the Islamabad talks, remain open. However, it is unlikely to concede its leverage quietly. Instead, Iran could pursue a strategy of indirect escalation, reinforcing proxy networks in Lebanon, Iraq, and Yemen, increasing pressure on regional shipping through deniable means, or accelerating its nuclear program to restore strategic parity through other forms of deterrence. In the longer term, Iran may seek to disrupt any emerging pipeline alternatives before they become operational realities. This could involve cyber operations, targeted sabotage, or political pressure on transit states. The logic is straightforward. If Hormuz cannot be controlled, alternative routes must be made equally uncertain. This dynamic introduces a new layer of risk to an already fragile situation. What appears as a technical naval operation in the present may, in fact, be the opening move in a broader contest over the future architecture of global energy. And this is where tactical success begins to blur into strategic ambiguity. For critics and analysts alike, the concern is not the mission itself, but the method surrounding it. When ceasefires are perceived as temporary mechanisms to enable military repositioning rather than sincere efforts to de escalate conflict, they risk losing their diplomatic value. Over time, adversaries may come to see negotiations not as pathways to peace, but as tactical traps, moments when one side gains advantage while the other lowers its guard. This perception feeds what might be described as a growing diplomatic deficit. It is not simply a matter of mistrust between the United States and Iran, but a broader erosion of confidence in the reliability of American commitments. If pauses in conflict are repeatedly followed by renewed pressure or escalation, the incentive to negotiate diminishes. The result is a cycle in which diplomacy becomes less effective and conflict more prolonged. The implications extend to America's global standing. Allies who once relied on Washington as a predictable partner are increasingly recalibrating their expectations. Transactional diplomacy, where relationships are measured in immediate returns rather than long term commitments, has introduced uncertainty into alliances that were once considered stable. In response, many nations are diversifying their partnerships, hedging against the possibility that American policy may shift without warning. At the same time, the United States has withdrawn from a significant number of international institutions in recent years, leaving gaps in global governance that competitors are eager to fill. While American forces focus on reopening shipping lanes in the Gulf, other powers are shaping the rules of emerging domains, from artificial intelligence to global trade standards, without U.S. input. Influence, once assumed, is now contested. There is also a domestic dimension to this dilemma. The urgency to reopen the strait is driven not only by strategic considerations, but by economic pressure at home. Rising fuel costs, market instability, and political expectations have made swift action imperative. In this context, the mine clearing operation serves both a military and a political purpose. It demonstrates decisive leadership while addressing immediate economic concerns. But urgency can come at a cost. When short term gains overshadow long term strategy, the risk is not failure in the present, but vulnerability in the future. Clearing the mines may restore the flow of oil, but it does not address the underlying tensions that led to their deployment, nor does it resolve the emerging contest over alternative routes that could redefine the region's geopolitical balance. The challenge, then, is not simply to clear a passage through the water, but to rebuild a pathway for trust, while navigating a rapidly evolving strategic landscape in which infrastructure, not just ideology, determines power. This requires a shift in approach, one that recognizes diplomacy as more than a supporting instrument to military action. It demands a reinvestment in the institutions and practices that sustain long term engagement, a professionalized diplomatic corps, consistent participation in international frameworks, and a willingness to align strategic objectives with cooperative solutions. It also requires a recalibration of how power is exercised. Military strength remains an essential component of national security, but its effectiveness is amplified or diminished by the credibility that surrounds it. When force is paired with predictability and restraint, it reinforces stability. When it is accompanied by uncertainty, it can undermine the very order it seeks to protect. The situation in the Strait of Hormuz captures this tension with unusual clarity. It is a moment where tactical necessity intersects with strategic consequence, where immediate success risks long term erosion, and where the future of global energy may be quietly rewritten. For American leadership, the lesson is both simple and profound. Clearing the minds is essential, but clearing the doubts about intention, reliability, and commitment may prove even more important. In the end, true strength is not measured solely by the ability to reopen a vital waterway. It is measured by the capacity to ensure that such waterways remain open not through force alone, but through a system of trust and strategic balance that makes their closure unnecessary and their replacement unnecessary as well. My View is a continuing series where I share informed commentary on a wide range of geopolitical and socioeconomic topics. If you found today's discussion helpful, please follow, subscribe, like, and share. Thank you for spending this time with me, and I invite you to explore other My View episodes available online. Until we meet again, goodbye.